Every video nowadays, I seem to be mentioning the deepening problems in the game. The rise of the aggro meta, the rise of damage inflation, the rise of power creep, the list goes on and on and on. But one of the biggest problems in the game, one that has silently caused all three of these big issues, hasn't been talked about at length yet. What is that problem? Well, of course, the alarming rise in the lack of weaknesses for brawlers lately. This is an issue that's always been in the background, but has started to become abundantly clear over the last year, with some of these new brawlers we're seeing, and of course, some of these buffies we're seeing. We'll look at three facets of examples: recent brawler examples, buffies examples, and examples from two classes that should have the biggest weaknesses. Let's start out with the recent brawlers, and there are quite a few. Funnily enough, Star Nova was actually pretty balanced and was handled quite well. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for a lot of her predecessors. First of all, Damien. I'm sure it's fresh in all of our minds, but this guy was released utterly broken. Most tanks have their natural counters, usually against brawlers with crowd control or brawlers with great burst damage. What about Damien? Well, he had both of those things. His crowd control was incredible for a tank, and his super was even more broken, giving him basically free kills on enemies, regardless of who they were, even against brawlers that theoretically should have countered him. Damien ended up as basically the ultimate tank, someone who received all of the benefits of being a tank, such as the health and mobility, without having to suffer the same consequences every other tank did. If we go back further, we get to Nagia. On release, she dropped completely broken and overtuned. Her main attack was devious, basically getting free auto-aim, allowing her to counter snipers who should have been able to do good against her. Her super was even more diabolical, giving her the most annoying snakes known to mankind, that would deal insane damage, and would even deal damage on death if you were close enough. This allowed her to easily deal with basically every brawler in the game, from snipers to aggro, and her main attack allowed her to even deal with throwers, leading to basically an invincible brawler. So good that she still managed to be S tier even after a multitude of nerfs. Let's go back even further to everyone's favorite balanced brawler, Sirius. On release, he was an absolute and utter demon. You could honestly consider him one of the most powerful brawlers of all time when he first dropped. His super was just insanely broken. Being able to copy enemies basically allowed him to do anything. If he's facing a brawler that counters him, he could just clone that brawler to protect him. The more powerful the brawlers he faced, the more powerful he got. And of course, just like Nagia, he just wasn't weak to anything he should have been. Aggro got melted by his shadows up close, snipers couldn't do anything to his shadows, and his only big counter, Ems, was almost as good as him in the meta, being a high S tier brawler at the time, showing just how strong he was. Next up, we got Globert, who was actually an interesting case. Before release, he was a pretty interesting brawler, even weak, and definitely more of the traditional support, a brawler that truly relied on teammates to win. And then he got buffs. Huge buffs. His range was incredible, his ability to lock onto enemies and just damage while healing himself and teammates simply gave him insanely broken utility that no brawler should have. His super was also great for killing enemies or pushing away aggro brawlers, which you guessed was one of his biggest weaknesses. His other supposed weakness, snipers, couldn't even counter him, as Globert could use his dash gadget and his respectable 8-tile range to simply lock onto them and drain their life. And of course, this led to some big nerfs, especially to his range, which actually made him quite balanced, but still, he's by far one of the best and most consistent supports. Now let's talk about the two classes that should have the most weaknesses, the sniper class and the thrower class. These are classes who have powerful attacks, with snipers having the biggest range, and throwers having the ability to throw over walls, and therefore are balanced by their glaring weaknesses, mainly to aggro brawlers. But what if that wasn't the case anymore? Let's take a look at the most recent brawler of each of these classes. First of all, Pierce. He's a very cool brawler in theory, but in practice, he's just breaks what it means to be a sniper. His DPS ability is incredible, and a good Pierce is almost impossible to kill, even with being an aggro brawler. His ability to recharge his ammo every time he hits a shot, his undodgeable super, his attack shells, his slowing star power, and finally his devious shield gadget all combine to make him, facing up close, a living hell. In no world should a sniper have this many tools to face off against aggro brawlers and just brawlers in general, as he can basically take down anyone, including his fellow snipers. Now Juju. This is an older one, but a very relevant one. She was basically built to be the new age thrower, a thrower that could deal against any threat. Her ability to spawn Gree, a killing machine in its own right, allows her so much versatility. She can use it as a body block almost to the extent of a tank, or she can use it to fend off against aggro brawlers. Furthermore, her environment mechanic also allows her crazy versatility, being able to slow enemies with her main attack or attack enemies with a range that rivals a sniper. Overall, her versatility for a thrower is alarming. She's basically built to have almost no weaknesses, and that has allowed her to remain meta for her entire history, which is unheard of for most brawlers, let alone such a volatile class like the thrower class. Our final example comes from everyone's favorite new mechanic, buffies. First of all, Edgar. Before his buffies, Edgar was struggling and heavily. He had fundamental problems and, more importantly, big weaknesses that seemed like they would never be solved. Well, never say never. Edgar's buffies brought his solutions to these problems. His Let's Fly gadget now acted basically as a second super. This made it even easier to play as an Edgar, giving him much better mobility and less reliance on his super. His hyper buffy was also broken, letting him compete in bursts with a lot of his counters, and overall, his weaknesses were just negated through his buffies. Another example comes from Ems. Before her buffies, she was just another mid brawler and was quite weak against aggros, heavily relying on her gadget to deal with them. After her buffies, she became a menace to everyone, including aggro brawlers. With her super, she could literally become invulnerable. With her hyper, she could now poison enemies. With her gadget, she could now stun enemies, and you get the point. Ems's weaknesses were basically all gone, and for a good chunk of time, she was the best brawler in the game, and still is to this day an A-tier brawler. And with that, we're done with the examples. What we've seen is that Brawl Stars are doing two things. They're releasing brawlers without weaknesses, or so strong they overcome their weaknesses, and they're removing weaknesses from brawlers who previously had weaknesses with their buffies. So, why exactly is this happening? Well, first of all, Brawl Stars simply wants to release brawlers broken. They want brawlers that will be remembered, and they believe the best way to do that is by releasing brawlers that are broken on release and nearly game-breaking. These brawlers, with how they're designed and just how powerful they are, have the byproduct of not having crippling weaknesses, and are designed more as generalists rather than specialists. And then after a few months and millions of nerfs, these brawlers are reduced to a sink or swim state, where some brawlers become irrelevant and others manage to find a suitable balanced niche. And to be honest, even in this nerf state, these brawlers are still even more generalist than your average older brawler. And of course, the more important reason, the aggro meta. With how powerful aggro brawlers are becoming, and how much burst they're capable of doing, brawlers need to have a way to actually defend themselves. Of course, with the concept of self-sufficiency. And so brawlers you wouldn't typically expect to be able to defend against aggro suddenly had tools to do that very thing. This started all the way back with hypercharges, with one good example being Piper, who turned from a passive sniper to an almost assassin-like brawler that was suddenly a threat to everyone, including aggro brawlers. Of course, Larry was another pioneer of the new self-sufficient brawlers, being the first thrower with a spawnable, able to defend himself against aggro brawlers, even to the point where he could be considered a generalist, something that we would have never expected out of a thrower. And here we are now. Brawlers are losing their weaknesses, or not even being released with weaknesses, leaving the brawlers with weaknesses to either conform or become irrelevant. Where do we go from here? Well, it's complicated. Aggro brawlers are just getting more and more powerful with less and less weaknesses. The only way brawlers who get countered by them to survive is to get more and more powerful with less and less weaknesses. So at the end of the day, it's basically just an arms race. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe to help support the channel. If you want to support the content even further, become a member for some special perks like helping out on videos or choosing video ideas. And finally, watch this video, or check out this playlist, or join the Discord server, or check out my music channel if you like the music in the video.